And, oh, okay.
Just in case.
Just in case. Okay, sounds good. So the questions I really wanted to dig into is, yeah, absolutely. Let's build ethical businesses. And let's just say living in late stage capitalism is going to make it really difficult to shift gears into how do we do things ethically? Because as we know, social media, academics, academia and other institutions, including our media in general, are not ethical in the way they behave, the way our governments are lined up, the way huge corporations are larger than many economies and are shifting the way things are. So we just live in right now an inherently unethical situation. And it wasn't always like that. So let me just give like a 2-minute overview of how we got into this mess.
Please.
Previously, patriarchy has existed in some form or another for about 2,000 years. And when we start thinking about how capitalism evolved in particular, we want to look towards Western Europe, where I live in London, Greater London in the UK. And this is one of the areas that was impacted. That was the impetus to start where we are right now. And living on that soil as someone whose lands were colonized by the British. The British took $73 trillion out of India. That is a statistic I have seen in some pieces. So, certainly being colonized, I was raised in the US and now I moved to the UK voluntarily, migrated here as an adult to continue my education. So that's what brings me here. But that certainly impacts my well-being, my body, living in this place. So what particularly shaped capitalism, in a few sentences, is we had the feudalism, and I'm not saying it was a perfect system, and there was certainly a lot to be wanted by the workers, but workers in general had way more rights than workers do today. They didn't work year round. There was some kind of push back and forth that was happening. And so I don't want to glorify it or anything. There's a lot of history and references around this. But what started to happen was a series of shifts that happened that weren't, some people say, oh, capitalism was predictable. It was going to happen. There was no other. No, these are actually laws put in place by the upper classes, the bourgeois, to put in and start fucking things up in a way that they could grasp money, power, and consolidate things to support them. So these were not natural laws. These were very much doctored and manufactured. So some of the strategies they started to use was the enclosure of the commons. And I think more people need to be learning that. And what that means is they started to fence up the commons. And that means the land that would have been free for everyone, you could use the water there, the wood that was on these properties, the trees or so on, so for firewood or whatever you might need, there was some communication of the people of the community all sharing and being on this land and using the resources. So if you didn't have a place where you could build a home, you could live on the commons. If you needed to graze your animals, there was a space to do that. So it was a communal place, and we had things like the Highland Games, whisper networks or community developed around this. So one of the most damaging things that the law started to be passed was, we're going to sever this connection of the commoners to their land by fence, and they use a variety of tactics here, but they fenced it off. They kept people, pushed vagrant people off, and so on. So in that process, there's a lot of violence that happens, connection with nature. Before that, we wouldn't have had the things like, there are places I visited that don't have things like water bills, because that's a free resource. But the commodification of the land itself necessitates these things, right?
Yeah.
So it says who belongs here, who doesn't. And so people where they have no space now can't live anywhere. So, and we see that homelessness or houselessness being a thing. It's illegal to be out, but if you have nowhere to be, where are you supposed to go? You could have been on the commons, but now they're disappearing, and they have been for several hundred years now. So that's one piece of the violence. There's a lot of propaganda campaigns that also happen. We're talking about gender things, sexuality pieces. So when we think about women and gender minorities becoming the common, oh, you can attack or have these people and this will become the common. I mean, there's some, before that, there was wide ranges of sexuality and different sorts of communities all over Europe and certainly around the world. But we start to have propaganda campaigns at different times in different ways that divide people, that indoctrinate people. This is not a good lifestyle, that is not good. So some of these things are like midwifery and so on, and herbalism, which were mostly women or gender minority arts, taken away and become part under, you know, a male dominated profession. So women not having that. So there's a lot of things that happen, and over different time periods and different countries and different situations, there's all of this that starts to happen. So these are some of the features of capitalism. And one of the last feature I'll talk about, obviously there's way more. Besides this, I'll also mention the divide and conquer strategies where people start to build solidarity in different ways and they're smashed time and time again, breaking up the resistance, laws that break up the resistance, right? But then the other piece is a Marxist term, which of course I'm gonna forget, which is, it'll come back to me. But basically it is, and this pertains to our discussion here, of what makes the difference between commerce, which has naturally occurred with people. I make pots, I sell the pots, with that excess, then I can, you know, and before currency, you know, we might have exchanged, there was different types of commerce happening, but then we created currency, and that makes this exchange easier, so we don't need to trust and know each other. Is a stand-in for that relationship we might have. And so that in and of itself is not a negative thing. It necessitated trade and commerce. The part where it becomes capitalism is where it's called primitive accumulation. Thank you, I remembered. And that piece of, that's the piece where it becomes capitalistic, where we are now taking someone else's labor. So let's take an Amazon worker. They are packing certain units. And when we think of that supply chain, someone probably also had to make the book and not get paid. Someone had to sew the garment or make the plastic item or tend some sort of thing like the makeup. They're making all these things with hand or watching a machine make it and quality control. And so somebody's not getting paid. There's lots of labor people in here for this Amazon product. We have this worker and they're not, they might be filling certain number of units by making it or selling it or packaging it or delivering it. And they're only paid a fraction of that. The rest of the labor, the value of what they've made isn't kept for them. It is funneled up through, let's say, to Jeff Bezos or so on, right? So they accumulate that wealth, and that accumulation is what's capitalistic. Otherwise, it's commerce. And I just really want people to understand that now that's not the only difference. We will talk more about that. As I mentioned, that Sowing Post Capitalist Seeds course, we can go deeper into the money and to the specific legislations and the historical points that I just mentioned. But here's a few that you need to be thinking about. So most people in micro businesses, in small businesses, are not capitalists. We are workers in our own business, meaning we need to be, we're not stealing other people's labor. Now, is there things we can be doing to be ethical? Yeah, there's certainly a number of things. Treating ourselves better, paying ourselves a living wage. That's a big one I see. Treating our supply chain better. our staff or other workers, so on. Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, okay, that was amazing. Wow, thank you. That's a lot. That I am glad that I was taking notes so that I could, and that it's recorded on 2 different platforms so that I can revisit and learn. So I think it would be really helpful to restate your definition of capitalism, because I mean, the definition of capitalism that I always learned was, like the means of production are owned by like oligarchs and assholes, and I think that your definition would include that, but it would also be more nuanced.
Definition. Okay, so I don't use definitions, but let me explain that. Just because
are definitions inherently capitalist?
No.
Or patriarchal or white supremacist?
I used to teach science, and so one of the first activities I'd have us do was not looking at the dictionary, thinking about what is our working definition of science. And so different students would share them, and we would come up with a working definition for the class. So actually, when I think of this, it's so specifically like on the application for the course, I have what's your working definition of capitalism? Because I really want to know what's right for you right now. So what I'm saying is, depending on how I'm feeling and what part of capitalism I'm feeling into, my definition is changed because it's right for what I'm looking at right now. Plus, dictionaries are a part of capitalist institutions. And so therefore, they have a vested interest in saying things often from the position of power, not from the marginalized and the historically disenfranchised. And that's where the definitions need to come from. So yes, what you're saying and that piece around that Marxist term that I used, primitive accumulation, those are certainly features of capitalism. I think right now, if I had to pick a definition, I would say it is an exploitative system that's based on hierarchy and exploitation that concentrates wealth into the hands of a few at the expense of the planet and people. So that would be my working definition at the moment. But ask me again in a week, it might be different. I should write that definition down. But anyway.
It's okay. It's recorded and transcribed.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really love the nuance of working definition. And it's funny because what's coming up for me around that is like, yeah, but I need like a framework. Give me a framework, and that's so interesting to see, like, my own internalized capitalism, my own internalized patriarchy and white supremacy, because that's what that all comes from, So I would love to hear you talk about why we need to be creating an ethical business now more than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want the whole focus to be here. I could spend an hour on each of these bullet points that we've talked about, that we're going to be addressing.
Yeah.
And I want to do each one justice. So the short version of why we need to be doing it is we're not going to have a planet that's habitable for humans much longer. The right now in India, my parents are from India, so I'm Indian diasporic person. So the record temperatures in Pakistan and India are becoming uninhabitable for humans, and birds are literally falling out of the sky because they can't take the heat right now. So if for no other reason, that is a good fucking reason from my perspective. And I'm not going to filter, but yeah, so that we want to save the planet. We want, and also I believe there is a way to be useful, like, focused in commerce without exploiting. And honestly, the legacy of capitalism is a few hundred years old. We've not even stopped capitalism. And I didn't even mention how capitalism then led to the colonial mess that we've also created. That's its cousin of, right? And so we haven't stopped these harms of violence. So any forces, like to use, that fractal analogy of if some of us start to pull away from that machine in different ways and start to create micro economies and do things in different ways, it will have a ripple effect. At least that's what I hope.
I agree. I mean, even if we're like making tiny, tiny cracks in the walls of these oppressive systems, our decision to not participate in them and to actually, disrupt and transform them, hey, at least we're not doing it, and we're impacting the others in our sphere to model a different way. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think it's so much more fun to be fun, pleasurable, whatever word that is, positive, to be ethical, to care about your fellow humans, beings, etc. and the planet, frankly. I don't get a kick out of exploiting. And I know that there are some assholes out there who do, and I wish they would get therapy. But, I definitely don't. And so learning how to do this, how to do my, my business, which I'm not mining and I'm not, doing stuff that feels inherently exploitive. So I'm really interested in hearing how someone like me and the people in, my community could have an ethical business and save the planet. You know what I mean? Like how our actions can do that. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's definitely go there, maybe a little bit later, because I want to talk about some other things first, because what I tend to see is people will glom on to, if I just did it this way, if I just did it this way, and they're looking at tactics and strategies, but not from this grounded understanding.
Yeah.
So like for example, this is a current example, just happened in the last day or so, Walmart selling this Juneteenth ice cream, right? Yeah, what the fuck, right? And what do? They're not only trying to trademark the name, like what? And instead of like it becoming a public holiday, which yes, I celebrate, but none of the other actions, including reparations and other things that we need to be doing, and a mass apology, a mass supportive gesture to Black Americans. As a US citizen, I feel like that's something that could have happened and should be happening, but hasn't. Free education for them through university or whatever, right? Meaningful gesture instead of this. And then Walmart, which, I've read Sam Walton's biography. He did not start out to be like that. He was an honest worker, and his mission was really to make things as like cut out the middleman, to lower prices to people who his consumers were, right? To get the products into their hands at a lower price. I mean, that's not inherently unethical, just like the hamburgers that McDonald's uses, right? Their thing was location and they've got a process in which we can deliver universally good product. And so on. Where it becomes capitalistic is we start to create this propaganda machine that goes around it, right?
Exploit the workers.
Wait, so around this ice cream, they are creating a Juneteenth ice cream.
Unbelievable.
And then, and instead of uplifting Black-owned businesses or so on, hiring a Black company, like, they could have done it in so many different ways, right? Give a discount to Black citizens. I mean, that might be against the equal rights things, but there's ways they could have done these things, but they did not. They chose to do this, and now they've apologized and they're pulling the line, and that's the right thing to do, but they shouldn't have gone that way. So what I'm saying is tactics don't work. We need to look at the culture, the understanding, our root ourselves in our own business, in our own, why did we start this thing, our own essence, before we start developing tips and tricks and like, because then we just do performative nonsense that is actually harmful. So that takes me to the point of what happens if we don't do it or don't do it properly. Well, that's a great example. And in the coaching world, a great example just happened about a year ago, or maybe a little bit more than that, when the George Floyd protests happening. And you might have heard about the situation of what happened in Marie Forleo's B school. And you know about the situation, but I'll explain for people who might not be in the know. She has a legacy Bees group. She had, it's past tense at this point. The group still exists, but it's in different hands and they're taking a very different direction. But, you know.
Marie Forleo is a business coach.
Yes, that's correct.
Has a product, B School, that she has been running for several years, like probably a decade at this point, on, you know, your ideal client and starting your business on your online service business. Anyway, go on.
That's right. So it's she's big in the name of entrepreneurial groups. So George Floyd protests start to happen, and you know, whereas people who were struggling during the pandemic in general were struggling and were given an outlet and support, Black people who were sharing, Black women in particular, sharing their upset, were shut down. And then instead of dealing with this, Marie Forleo, who had promised to do this work times before, once again didn't, and shirked responsibility and basically said, this isn't even a paid for space and whatever. It's like, these are your alumni. Yeah. And they're hurting, and the least you could do is support and listen. But she instead abandoned the group, and it's been taken over by other business owners who are, intersectional and supportive of different types of business. So that's a wrong way to approach it. So you actually, if you're not doing this work, you're gonna be hurting people. You're gonna make mistakes anyway. So let's just be honest. It's a learning process. So we're not gonna get it right every single time. But the likelihood, if we have done this work, if Walmart had higher ups in their organization that had Black staff, would this have happened? No. So if they had done their work and changed the culture, it would have been very different.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the difference. That's the night and day difference. And these are just two of dozens of examples I wrote down of like things I could talk about. I just talked about what felt right at this moment, but dozens of examples that are happening like this. And in one way, I don't, this whole thing about cancel culture, I do want to say that's not what's happening here. Marie Forleo is making an awful lot of money. And
so is Walmart.
Yes, and so is Walmart. So it's not like they're going to hurt from this, right? But what you are doing is cancel culture actually then attacking, Black people or Indigenous people or Asian people or Latinx people who are doing the work, Indigenous people who are doing the things, and then they get doxxed, they get harmed. So that's really who's going to get harmed. But in this, it's a punching down move. It is, because you're hurting large sorts of people. And sometimes people can't afford to not shop at Walmart. So it might be their livelihood. That might be the only job around them. So they have to, their life is now entangled with Walmart's, but that's not really what they would like to be doing. So you're causing ripples of harm. And, and I said, we're not necessarily being unethical, but the devices we're using, the chocolate we might be eating, these are all coming from resources of a planet. They're all based on mostly unethical labor. Children are often have to go into these mines to get the metals to put into our laptops or what have you. So it's not right. So we want to be judicious. Like we have a lot of things to answer for as people in the global north, right? For stealing these resources at an unprecedented level and very unbalanced level, right? So I know that's a lot, but this is why you can maybe pick some issues that are important to you and work on them in your business. So that brings me to my 3-step framework that I've been
Let me interrupt you for a quick second.
Yes.
So what really, everything resonated with me, and what I really want to sort of emphasize is that, we'll be hurting people if we don't engage in this work, and if we don't have a program or a plan in our businesses, in our lives, to really be ethical, and we will, even though like I coach people and teach a class and I'm on my laptop, and even though I'm not doing something that is inherently terrible for the planet or inherently terrible for people, if I do it in a way that is not considerate or aware, I could actually be causing ripples of harm. And my laptop is manufactured in countries that are have exploitive contracts with Apple. You know what I mean? And so it's really it's really important to be aware of the ripples. And that's one of the really powerful things that I got from what you said. And so, yeah, how do we create a personalized action plan?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's really good. That's helpful. And also I want to say, just because if we break the law, we're not by unknowingly, we're not we can't just say, well, I didn't know, and we just walk away. Harm is committed. I'm not saying I totally agree with the law and legal systems, but just because we don't know we're causing harm by buying a crystal or, allowing anti-Blackness to be in our space because we didn't know better, right, it's still going to cause harm, right? We can't just leave that accountability behind. Is the other piece I want to say. You need to be accountable to the people, to the planet, to the land, to the water, to our money, right? To our well-being and our body. These are the ways we want to think about. It's not just people we might be harming. It's
right. Yeah. So would you say accountability is one of the steps in creating a personal action plan?
Well, it's not a step in and of itself, but it's in there. It's in there.
How do we do it? What's the framework?
It's like that old Ragu commercial, right? It's in there. I don't know if I'm being too old, but I haven't lived in the US in years, so that's one of the things I remember. So yeah, the 3-step framework is, one is understanding our essence. And I did this framework under the brand, one of our sub-brands, Manifest by Design, for years. And that was mostly a personal growth setting, but the framework is the same framework I use with businesses wanting to do the same thing. Okay, so that's just so you understand. This is not, I didn't just bake this up this week. I've been living this for a number of years. So this essence piece is really understanding who you are. Why did you start your company? I mean, some people, we could reduce it down to our company ethos, our belief system, our core values, our mission statement. Sure, if you need documentation, those are great. Your accessibility or economic statements, those are great assets to have. But really locking down who you are. And when I'm thinking about who you are, I'm not just talking about, so giving you an example, for me to ignore my Indian pieces would be really silly, to not name that in how I do work, because there are a lot of people who do what I do or similar things to what I do, but I'm not them. And so me acting like them is not going to do any good. I bring in that colonial piece because, in fact, my master's research was looking at how did the British change the identity of people, and I was looking at in Bharatanatyam, which is a very specific dance style, and looking at how that the cultural context changed during colonialism. around this one dance in this one very specific part of India, Telugu speaking India.
Mhm.
So I will bring those layers and nuance there, because yes, colonial violence happened in so many ways. In different places, there's different stories. They use the same mechanisms though, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at British colonialism, there's going to be certain fingerprints that are there. But for me to not embrace that as part of my essence, right? So I do talk about the model minority and why we need to be breaking that myth down. I do address in some of the projects I work with Asian and Pacific Island diaspora, because those are my people. We need to be doing the work, and there are certain things that are very specific maybe to the ways we want to work and unwind those oppressive pieces, right?
So understanding our essence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Piece.
Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of us don't do. You know, we're like, I want time freedom. I want location independence. And that's where we start from. And that's where we go.
That's right. And then we kind of copycat, like, you know, this cookie cutter. Okay, well, this is all the elements. I will set up this because somebody else said this. I will do my WordPress site here. I will, you know, whatever we're going to do. And they all look the same. And to be honest, if I see another scrolly font with a purple background, you know, like, you know what I mean? These girl boss.
I like purple.
You know what I'm trying to say with
I know.
This girl boss marketing.
Yeah.
Is that really the way that we want to be in the world? I'm going to bet that's probably not it. And for tools, some people will use Colby or human design. I even use hand analysis here. So we get really deep in this work. It's not just, okay, we just write our essence in a couple words and we're done. Or like, oh, here's a shopping cart full of the kind of core values you might have. Let's pick 2 or 3. No, we're going to really look at the wake. Where did you come from and which ones have spoken to you? What have you historically done through other threads of your life? Really, you know, it's really embracing these things. Like, what would you do in this kind of situation? How do you define success? How do you define these pieces in your brain? That look like and feel like beyond this capitalist framework, right? So those are pieces that we do in the essence step. The second step is the transformation, and this is when I line these up, it's like a little circle, bigger circle, a big circle. That's the third step, right? So this part, the transformation, is starting to find your voice, starting to nail down some of these pieces. And if you look at the way this would be, I don't have slides made at this point, but it would be like a megaphone, right? You start here with you, and we're going to go ever increasing concentric circles around us, more out in the world, more public.
Yeah.
Transformation is one of the harder steps, because it is, oh, that's how capitalism fucked with my identity here. Let me unwind that. And we think, oh yeah, I want to clean up my supply chain. And we're thinking maybe in this, right, like, so really, what might that look like? Oh, I want to make my supply chain local. But then we actually have to do the work of meeting local producers and growers and so on, right? That's the transformational process. It's like, oh, I want to move from a transactional way of relating with these people to a relational one. If we're talking about with money, we stop seeing money as a thing. And in my culture, it's very much a piece like an animistic worldview, right? That things aren't things, things have energy, they have essence, they have a life of their own that we need to be listening to and acknowledging and in relationship with. So it could turn into like some people that I've worked with, we have done ancestor pieces. Or we have started a dialogue around money, like writing money, a letter, or thinking back to what are the financial pathways that have been passed down to me through capitalism and colonialism in intergenerational trauma, and how do I start to make peace with them and unwind them? So it's the deep work of, because people say, oh yeah, I want a diverse company, or I want to create more accessible things or inclusive things. and they themselves haven't sat in the muck, and it's allowing ourselves to sit in the muck with it and do the work. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to hire some, queer folks here and call it a day. Like that's it. Let me get some queer folks. But if we don't actually do the work of changing our company's culture and the way we've set things up, those people are tokens at best. You're harming them, and you're sending kind of a message. You're sending really strong signals. And most people who, like on the surface, oh, it looks like, oh yes, we've got diverse stock images or diverse people. It looks good, and the wordage might be okay, but people in the know, and we talk, right? We're already having discussions of, actually, I went into that space and I wasn't safe. I wasn't held, and that's kind of the work you're doing in that trauma-informed group you've got, right? Where you're digging into that. Hey, can we make this a really safe space? And that means exploring some of our own trauma, and I'll let you speak to that more so than me.
Yes, and yes, and yes. So the transformation piece, wow. So it's really about, if I'm hearing you correctly, nailing down the pieces, finding your voice, figuring out kind of what your desires are for your transformational ethical approach to your business. But to do that, it's not just like, I want to be diverse, I want to have a good supply chain, right? Like that's just the beginning. The real work is figuring out how to actually make that happen, and devoting time and energy and resources to figuring that out, taking action, and also unpacking a whole lot of crap that might be really hard to unpack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the beauty of doing this stage not by yourself, because a lot of people are like, I can do this by myself, this is easy, right?
Yeah.
Is
this is easy.
Well, I mean, some people are like, oh yeah, I don't need this, or like, they just like, oh, I want to pick your brain for a while, Anuradha. They don't say it like that, but they come get some quick answers and they think they've got it figured out. And then, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. We'll just watch. If they involve me, great, cool. But
that's funny. I'll just watch the show, get my popcorn.
I don't do it like that, but you know what I mean. I just,
you're a better person than me.
I mean, I'm human, right? I do get upset when people do this. But the thing is, when we actually bring in help at this phase, we shorten the runway time. We make the transitions easier. We make it sustainable. We set up the systems for success. We were acting from a place of clarity, right? It's not just, let's throw some stuff around and see what happens, right? We're actually making targeted experiments. And and I call it experiments because my background is, my first degree was in biology. I worked in a lab on enzyme research. So I was looking at, and this is the part that I really bring to this work, is catalysts, which proteins and enzymes are living catalysts. And what they do is they don't come in and get involved in the reaction, but they speed it up by just holding the presence of all the items that need to react. They bring them closer together and they make that reaction more likely. They make it happen quicker, and they happen more sustainably and regularly. So that's what I'm doing. I'm holding the space for that transformation to happen. And I know there's a lot of people who do this work. So, they maybe have their own process, but they're going to be doing that excellent holding work that is necessary to do this deep level work. Because if we don't set it up in a way that's sustainable, we're just going to lean back on our white privilege. We're just going to lean back on this exploitation and hierarchy again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because it's the way we've been raised, right? It's the indoctrination, the soup we're living in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to really transform how we do things without support. I mean, I've tried it because I have gone through periods where I didn't have the money to pay for support, and, it wasn't covered by my insurance or anything like that because I live in the US. And yeah, the difference between having support and not having support, whew, it's really, really significant. And yes, not everybody can afford it all the time. So, that's why I'm guessing that part of an ethical business structure is having a plan for accessibility. It's especially for someone whose business is like mine, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I agree. So we have a pricing accessibility model in our Sowing Post Capitalist Seeds courses.
Awesome. That's great.
We have a global South pricing, not in the business course yet, but in time we grow it. We start with the seed of an idea, then we work in ever concentric circles. So first was creating the course and putting the seed into the world and developing the curriculum, getting people. And now we've got a global South pay what you can pricing because their exchange rate doesn't work in favor of them being able to attend. And so we had a couple people take us up on that.
That's great.
We have some sliding scale pricing. We have a lending library where people can borrow books that we talk about in the course, so we've developed that from the seed of an idea. Then it's not, I have to look at what that business is doing and copying because I can't copy what they're doing. My essence is not the same.
Yeah. I love that.
So this is where we can work in ever concentric circles that meet us at where we are. Oh yes, in 6 months, we'd like to offer that. Now, how do we make this cool idea happen? Let's backwards plan.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. I think that there's such a really Euro and US centric perspective in the coaching industry. Well, at least in my network, obviously, because I am based in the US and, where, it's simply not taken into account that people in the global South cannot afford, $1,000 a month or whatever. I mean, like, granted, there are plenty of people in the US and Europe who can't afford that either. But, specifically in developing and in the global South, and like it's one of my essence pieces that like, I don't want my work to just be accessible to privileged rich people in the global North, and that's been something that's been very challenging for me in terms of creating sustainability in my business. And also like getting a lot of pushback from my own coaches about that, who are like, you have to have sustainability first and then create a scholarship program or, a philanthropic, whatever. And I'm like, yes. And also there's something about that doesn't feel right, and it was like that for a while. And, fortunately my business is far more sustainable now, but like during that period of growth and, creating sustainability, it was really challenging for me. And I had a lot of cognitive dissonance and a lot of inner struggles around it, which I think made my life a lot harder. And probably if I had taken your course, that whole process would have resolved itself a lot quicker.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people come to this understanding of, I need to make my stuff price accessible. And maybe that's not actually like I had a discussion with somebody about this, that might not have been what they needed. So it's good to know what your people are saying, right?
Yeah.
What they needed. And you're right, support at those critical junctures of change really matter, right? And if we can't afford it, I mean, there's things, that's why I'm giving talks like this that are free. I have a number of other free resources that I'm working on. So hopefully that can meet and support some people.
Totally, yeah.
It can be difficult. And I do totally work on things like some people barter exchange work, this sort of thing. If you can do it, if you're privileged enough to be able to live like that, great. I also am chronically ill and so on. And so I do need money. And so sometimes that's the way so different times, different situations are all factoring into this. And so one solution is not going to fix everyone. Maybe not every doctor's office needs a sliding scale pricing. Maybe that's not what's needed. Maybe if we actually had gender forms that didn't cause people to have to jump through hoops in terms of male, female, and that, like no room for intersex or transness or anything. Gender is not sex. right? So like if your doctor's office was just supportive of the queer community and their needs, that would be amazing, right? So
Right.
stick to what's really your essence. If that's something you can own and hold, do that, you know?
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So I do want to be mindful of time.
Yes.
And so let's get to the third element, the third step in the framework. And then I would love for you to share about your course.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for keeping me on time. So yeah, I call it embodiment, and that maybe I need to fidget with these words so they're more businessy, but basically it's where we're living with integrity. We're living that. We're right. So this is the kind of, as we're that megaphone, we're amplifying that piece more, and we're sharing that with the world a whole lot more. And that means we're once again working in concentric circles. If I like this, then I'm going to hire other speakers, or like I hire a lot of guest speakers because I'm not an expert on everything, and I try to pick people from historically marginalized and disenfranchised communities because they're going to be sharing amazing stuff, right? That they're already doing that work, but let me uplift them where I can, right? So that's an ethic. It might be strategic partnerships or affiliate marketing in a way that makes sense. It might be stuff like legally protecting your intellectual property. I know we had a discussion about that. Is that a thing? Intellectual property is not necessarily capitalistic, but protecting it and making sure we're doing it in a judicious way. I mean, it's a lot of things we're calling intellectual property. I see people talking about yoga and they're not giving any credence back to Hindu and Dharmic traditions. Yeah. So they're not paying anyone in India. They're not using any of the kind of teachings that we would have in a Hindu framework. And they are stealing that. So that is not, you protecting that intellectual property, that's not in the spirit of the lineage tradition that it is.
Sure. Well, and protecting, trademarking Juneteenth is not.
That is not in, yes, exactly. So yes, do things judiciously, protect yourself, but not in this, it's someone else's labor that we are then capturing and taking, right? Like the whole Maslow's hierarchy, he got that from the Blackfoot tribe. So we really need to be thinking of these things that we constantly use these things. And he misinterpreted what they were saying in their culture anyway, and made it very individualistic instead of a collectivistic approach, which is what they were suggesting. So what I'm saying is this is where we have to do the research, and why we're going to be rocking between steps 2 and 3 quite a bit, because we start to dig and research and make relationships or connections like, oh yeah, this, and then we hit these roadblocks. Oh, actually, I didn't know that about Maslow, or oh, I need to be naming my teachers, or I maybe need further training. So we go back and pivot back. Let's go back to step 1 and root again, like remember what, and then that draws to stay. So we're going to be pivoting and moving between these steps rather fluidly, especially 2 to 3, that we're going to be kind of one step here, rock back. Let's do step 3 back,
Yeah. So it's not a linear process, it's not like Maslow's hierarchy. There's movement back and forth. It's dynamic.
That's the way I talk about it.
I love that. So tell us how the course works and all that good stuff.
Yeah. How does a course work?
And how we would be doing this work and being supported and, transforming the world and our lives.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be in it, which is exciting. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm so excited. And can I just say something real quick? Yeah. So I'm so excited for the course because, I've kind of rested on my laurels a little bit in terms of being like, oh yeah, my parents were hippies and communists, and they taught me that capitalism sucked from the age 2, where I would say it's time for the dictatorship of the proletariat. They taught me how to say that when I was 2. And, I just sort of assumed that I knew all this stuff, but I don't. And so I'm deeply, deeply excited to do this program with Anuradha and all the other people in the course. And especially for my own growth and development, like I'm very excited that there's going to be a decolonization piece, because that's also where I need to grow and learn. So yes, I'm so excited.
That makes me so happy to hear that. I'm super excited as well. And we start June 23rd, and we've already pushed back the date because we want to enroll people to make it worth our while, right? And it's an amazing curriculum. So where do we start? It's a 14-week journey, and it is a deep dive. We start, I picture this as a roller coaster. We get to the first class and we automatically are like, you didn't get that inching up time. No, you're already at the top, being ready to release down the highest part of that roller coaster of diving deep into what are the roots of capitalism. That's where we kind of start the course. And so I shared a little bit about the history framing, the political and socioeconomic patterns that capitalism started. And what we'll start to notice is there's patterns, there's themes, there's kind of like cyclic effects that we kind of see, because in capitalism in the beginning, like I was saying around sexuality, it was squashing queer movements and trans movements that were part of what's going on. It was also squelching, women or uterus havers to stop their as they need labor power, they will and this whole great resignation, right? Worrying about a number of white people, that pattern exists. So this pattern around stopping abortions, that is part of the capitalistic pattern, because they would have had that. There would have been access to herbs and other medicines to help people, but that became equated with witchery. And so then it was banned, right? So you're going to start to see these cycles. These are not new discussions. They're not new theme books. This is the same playbook they've been using for 500 plus years. So you start to see that. Then the first arc is diving into that, and then and this is the bugaboo I have of why I started teaching this course. We do this work with ourselves in a class, in a university setting, and people are not equipped for themselves or for other people in a community sense to hold each other in that grief, because your worldview fucking shatters. Mm-hmm. And it's because of that I had to leave the US, because it totally fucked me up, and I just had no one I could turn to be like, oh my gosh, the whole world came out from under my feet. Are you okay?
Yeah, I think hearing that really, brought up some stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm remembering grad school where I went for social work, and there was just a lot of devastation that was not really held for a lot of people. So yeah.
So that first 5-week unit, we are talking about this devastation, then we're healing it, we're grieving it, we're communally coming up and individually coming up with how do we now make peace. And from those, and this is from Joanna Macy, who does a lot of work around supporting environmental activists, the tears we shed in that process will grow the seeds of the next cycle coming. So that's the first segment. The second segment, we'll start to talk about labor and mutual aid and things like that. That we start to develop our individual and our business praxis. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And we've got a couple awesome guest speakers. One, Anupriya so far and she's going to be speaking about how do we put boundaries and other things in practice in our business, especially as solo entrepreneurs and so on, or the kind of head of our company. How do we protect ourselves? How do we put in practice that supports us monetarily, emotionally, and so on? So it's a really rich discussion. And then Faith, I can't think of her last name right now. it'll come to me. She's going to be speaking on inclusion. So how do we, when we start bringing in team, whether that's an employee or other contractors who might be working with us, how do we include them? How do we bring them in? And how do we change our culture so it's actually one of belonging? So those are two of the speakers. And the other ones are kind of haven't gotten back to me yet, but there's two others that are in the wings. And we're really going to dive into that spot. The third part is looking at profit, money, the kind of our connection back with land and decolonization and so on. So this is how we wrap up with coming, because when I say people, I mean people with a capital P, because we think of people as only like human resources or like people we can control, like, okay, who can I power over in some way? That's really the way a lot of people unfortunately think it.
Yeah.
Even if people wanting to be relational, we might still fall back on homophobic stuff or, like other stuff to lean on.
Yeah.
And when we start to think about this in a more holistic way, we can actually be relational with our money. We can be relational with the land and where these products come from, right? So we're mindful of these pieces. We put these things, and this is where we might look at creating accessibility statements and our plans. We might look at all sorts of things in this kind of arena. I had another idea, but it flew away. So I'll leave it.
It flew away. Maybe it will fly back.
So I'm really hoping that we set up that you'll have access to these. Some of this is pre-recorded material. Most of it will be, some of this will be live, that we speak about live. And then we actually have time during the live sessions to bring we have integration weeks and time to bring up our thing, share our screen and say, hey, give me feedback on this. I'm working on my accessibility thing, or I'm working on what kind of business model, like I want to change my business model or my business structure to support this, right? So these are the kinds of questions I get a lot of times. And so we can actually bring those questions to the group and work with them.
I love it. I'm so excited.
Yeah, that's right. And we've got a sliding scale.
Mm-hmm.
3 pricing tiers, 600 pounds, 800 pounds, and 900 pounds. And that just helps us. And we've got 2 people of color scholarships. 1 person of color scholarship and 2 work trades. So available. So those are some alternative ways you can still participate.
That's great. I love that. Thank you for making that accessible. And also taking care of your own sustainability too. Like it doesn't have to be either or. Mm-hmm. And, it either or, zero sum, black and white thinking is all based in scarcity, and it doesn't have to be like that. Mm-hmm. So excited. This has been such a great conversation, and there was more that we wanted to get to, but I guess you'll just have to take Anuradha's class in order to to learn more, or go to her page so that, I'm sorry, shit, I did it again. Go to Anuradha's page. I apologize. To learn about other opportunities. I'm sure you'll be talking about the course over the next month and sharing more about it. And this has been such an honor. Thank you. Is there anything that you want to finish up with before we close this?
Thanking you. Thank you so much for hosting me, for encouraging me to keep going with this. And I want to say 100 things. And I also just want to say, I just want to be complete at this moment too, because otherwise I will go into another deep dive and I will stop.
All right. So now I will figure out how to end this live. Anyone care to tell me?
I think if you you can go to where it says Facebook and it'll say, oh no, I don't know. Maybe on your computer, it will say stop live stream at the top. Like when you go under.
On my Zoom?
On your Zoom where it says Facebook.
Oh,
at
yes,
the
it
very
does.
top.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the instruction. Thank you for bearing with me in my technical difficulties. And thank you everybody for your attention. And please, if you have questions about the course, please reach out to Anuradha, and, you know, hope to be on this journey with you. Thank you for your time today. And thank you, Anuradha, for your time today.
Thank you, Eryka.
Okay,
You want to hit stop recording as well?
sure.